welcome to the next session. We have a few panelists who are still on their way. So I'll just start. This session I'm really interested in. It's navigating ethical AI and digital well-being in education, a really important issue worldwide. Different countries have different levels of AI in the classroom. So looking forward to the different insights.
Thanks, Angeline. Great to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about how it is in Zimbabwe and what's the level of in the classrooms, in education, digital, do you see issues with AI, with EdTech that kind of was discussed earlier?
In the Zim situation, we've got generally the adoption of digital technologies happened some schools before COVID, but most schools came on board during the pandemic because they were basically forced into it. I remember 10 years ago when we're talking about EdTech and people would be looking at us strangely, like, what are you talking about? And then when COVID happened, it was an eye-opener and everybody was like, you guys are prophets. How did you know? But, we could see where the world was going and just understanding those dynamics where you've got children who are in the rural areas, for example, who cannot access the physical school. And we thought it would be good to incorporate the digital aspect, the hybrid aspect. So currently, yes, there's a lot of uptake of digital technologies, from smart boards to Zoom sessions to using Google Meet, Google Classroom. They've also got platforms like WhatsApp that are also used in sharing homework and discussions around classroom assignments. Now, when it comes to AI, however, there is no solid structure in place because, again, there was no preparation really in most classrooms. And on top of that, the infrastructure is just not there for many schools. Mainly because we struggle with things like electricity, connectivity, and affordability of the gadgets, affordability of the Wi-Fi. So you've got one side where there's a clear uptake. They've got all the resources. They've got iPads. They've got desktop computers, laptops, all that, and smartphones for one person. And then you've got the other side where you've got a child who doesn't even know how to switch on a computer, who doesn't know how to go onto the internet. And this is the situation where we are now looking at it to say, how do you then introduce AI into such a space where some children are so far behind in their appreciation of the value of the digital technologies? The other gap is when it comes to the educators. We've got educators who went to learn how to teach years ago. I know I heard a lot of the discussions around how our smartphones were here 10 years ago. We had the internet 20 years ago. It wasn't really the case for some of us here. I think I saw my first smartphone when I was in 2013, when I traveled. That's when I had my first experience with a smartphone. And so that's the setup that we're coming from, where we are sort of following behind what the rest of the world is doing. However, there is a huge appetite, especially from the young people. And when we have our interactive sessions with them, it's clear that they're already using the AI technologies. They're already using ChatGPT. They're using Meta AI, Quillbot. They're always exploring, and they're very curious. They're very tech savvy. And because they're doing it in a space where there's no limitations, the educators are not clear on what's going on in some instances. Parents even more in the dark. So you've got children who are having the time of their lives on this AI playground.
I think that's a good point. Hello, Rocio.
Hello, Angeline.
Edith was just giving a background about EdTech in Zimbabwe, how the situation is, how there's a lot of kids who have quite a bit of experience and others who have very, very little, have trouble turning on a computer. And we are actually, Rocio and I are in Italy. I'm in southern Italy. I think my situation is probably closer to yours, Edith. And how is it? It's important. Your perspective is important because you actually work at a school. You're connecting from a school. So can you give, your perspective about how is like AI and digital well-being in your area?
I have to say that we European countries that belongs to the European Union, we have to comply with GDPR. So it is going so fast, everything that related to AI, that even the European Union has problems to go to uh, create the laws and give advice, etc. So we have to follow the GDPR. That means that we have to create risk assessments for every platform that we use. We have to create a AI literacy curriculum for teachers and students. The school have responsibilities about the data and how they are going to work. And so it's a complicated moment, and even in Italy it's harder because, for example, now Italy was one of the few countries, democratic countries, that banned OpenAI at the beginning because it didn't respect the laws, the Italian laws about data privacy. And now it's happening the same with DeepSeek. So we are in a position that we have a kind of protection, but can be also a disadvantage, obviously, because it's something that stop in some way the evolution, because the kids are using AI. So we have to absolutely stay ready to give them the tools as good as possible.
I think that's a good point. I'm going to ask you first, and then I'll ask Edith to answer this question. Because Edith also mentioned the issue is the teachers, they had their teaching education far before any of this existed. The kids are using it and without much of an education. So, how do we solve this? What's like the best way? Because it's obviously a short-term need. We need to solve it quickly. So, what are your experiences first, you and then Edith, about what can be done?
Okay, I created now the AI literacy curriculum for the school, and we are following the DPR law. But the point, I think, that is introduce routines, for example, regarding critical thinking routines for the students, data privacy routines for the students, ethical decision routine for the students. It's kind of at least of check the points of this list of questions that we provide to the students in order to, as all the routines is kind of every day, so immediately they start to understand all the implications, answering the questions. Later, if you wish, I can share that proposal. Is it okay? If we have time, I will love to share with you and all the community.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely get back to that. This will be interesting. Edith, how about you? How do we solve how do you solve it in your country? What can you do?
Definitely the AI literacy curriculum. We had a digital literacy curriculum that we developed, but most schools were not willing to adopt it because they felt like it's additional work on top of the curriculum that the schools have. But now, because they're seeing more and more the value in it, there's more of an uptake. And to that, we've now added the AI component and AI literacy component. Another strategy, which I think is really important, is to involve the educators when we're coming up with these policies, whether they are at the school level or at the national or even at the global level. We need the teachers who have the actual experience in the classroom, who are applying the traditional or older curriculum to see how best we can fit everything in together. And just also to get to know more about what the challenges are in implementing the tools that they're already using, and then sort of seeing how best we can navigate the challenges.
I think that's actually a good point. Someone I think it was a previous session, mentioned internet safety labs, which tomorrow Lisa is going to speak. And of course, one of the issues that they have highlighted, this is about ethical AI and digital well-being, is they did a research and saw that obviously the more well-off schools had more privacy-friendly EdTech solutions, and the less well-off schools couldn't afford it, and the children, obviously, more of their data is being taken, more influential to advertisement and stuff is also being taken. So, I mean, how can we solve this in education? Because I've been interviewing a lot of parents, I call them EdTech privacy parents, who had issues with their schools. And a common thing is that I've seen these are all European countries, that tech companies were coming basically directly to the school and negotiating with the school, which I think is a big power imbalance, right, between the tech company and people, as especially you said, Edith, don't necessarily have the know-how. Yeah, so I'd like to know your point on that, and especially you, Rocio, because you're in the school. You're probably the person that they might come and negotiate with. So how do you deal with that when people in the school simply aren't prepared, and it's also understandable that they're not prepared, that it all came so quickly?
No, I mean, the parents, I have the feeling that they don't know well how to manage the situation, because obviously it's going so fast that it's difficult to stay behind and understand everything what is happening, because it's happening so fast. But that is the point, that the AI literacy curriculum must be done for all the stakeholders of the school, must be done for the parents, for our guardian, for sure, for the students, for the staff, and for the leadership, and obviously for the teachers. So that is the point, to show them how means to use ChatGPT. What is important? It's important to use properly, but also, since I say ChatGPT, how could be other generative AI, that everything now is a generative AI. So it's kind of say to them how to use it, and the consequences is you don't use, taking into account, for example, data privacy. That this is important because they are kids. So also there, and also for the parents, because sometimes we have now the opportunity, if you think about, we have now the opportunity to do well what we didn't do well when we started with the social media, for example. So now we have the opportunity, okay, which rules would you like to put? Which advice will you give to the parents, to the students, that you didn't, because you didn't know what now is happening, and it's the beginning, so we can actually give that feedback to parents and to students and teachers also, because the teachers also, we are kind of what is happening.
Edith, I want to ask you your experience. As you said, the teachers are kind of slowly accepting it, but the kids are using much more AI than others. I mean, if I can also ask, also from this like digital well-being perspective, how have you seen impacts on these kids all using these chat GPs and AI kind of without controls?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the children did it without really understanding what the technology has to offer, how to use it responsibly and ethically. So you've got situations where you actually hear of children who have created content which can be illegal, even using those tools, because they now have the sense of adventure. Like I was saying, they're very curious, they want to try everything. But one of the things that I'd say would be of concern is where they're using, for instance, Meta AI. I always assumed people use Meta AI to ask questions and to maybe get to cut on their productivity time. But I was actually astonished to hear a lot of the students are using it as an AI companion. Like they'll chat to Meta AI, tell Meta how they spend their day, and ask questions around how do I deal with this relationship situation. So there's a blurring of lines now. It's not longer that they're using these tools just as educational tools. They're also using them for social reasons, for emotional support, for advice about relationships and friendships. and other things beyond the scope of what a school would generally be looking at. Because like in our setup, most of the role of the school is usually the academic side, making sure that the student has that academic structure and everything that they're using is linked to making sure they get good grades, they're doing well in school. But when you now have this tool where they can actually have a social aspect to it, a lot of the schools are struggling. I remember one head of school that we were talking to about character AI, and we had gone there for something different. It was a career guidance day, and we were asking the students, so in preparation for your future careers, how are you using technology to get information or to learn more about the future career? And that's where it came out that they are actually now using these AI companions and other things beyond the scope of what the school or the parents think they're using. So yeah, that can be quite a dilemma where the people who are supposed to be supporting, informing, guiding are not in the loop, or they have absolutely no clue. In fact, when we had that particular discussion, most of the people, the adults that we're talking to, didn't even know about AI chatbots, about AI companions. Some of them just thought with Meta, it's Meta AI, for example, stop there. And speaking of Meta AI, we've had the situation where my grandmother, she lives in the rural areas. She's almost 90 years old, and she's got a smartphone. And suddenly one morning she woke up to Meta AI, and she was just feeding things into it. And so you've also got that situation where you've got a population of consumers and users who don't understand what is going to happen beyond my interaction with this tool. Is this information going to be used somewhere else? What's going to happen after this? So the issue, just to follow up on the question you asked Rocio earlier, that transparency is really important, and allowing for informed consent, especially where schools dealing with technology companies directly without parental involvement. I think we need to reevaluate that, open it up so that parents are at least aware of what exactly is happening. I'm happy to say some of the schools that we work with actually do hold sessions where if a technology company is coming in with something, they will have an online meeting such as this one or a physical one where parents are invited to ask questions to get more information. And if the majority of parents are not in agreement with adoption of that particular tool, then that's what happens. And that's the direction that I think we should all take.
Okay, thank you. No, that's interesting from those perspectives. So we now have Evelyn Kasina, from Kenya. You're in Kenya now, right? So can you give your perspective? How is it with like EdTech and AI with you, and what issues do you have with like parents and teachers? What's the most burning issue, so to speak?
Thank you very much for adding me into this panel. I think as an educator who deals with, so I educate children from K-12, and fortunately I also teach at a university, so I'll give both perspectives. I think for me, the growing concern I have is we are, after COVID, I know with the adoption of technology and gadgets, research has become openly adaptable, especially in our side of the world. But I feel like we have kids who don't want to go the extra mile. I'll give an example of my own children, who even when they want to look for just a dictionary meaning of something, they can't go to use the actual dictionary. So they are losing certain skills that would help them in the absence of technology. Another thing I'm finding is that, because the languages are still being built, then we don't have a lot of information around, especially like in Africa, we don't have a lot of African-based information. So I find like sometimes I would tell my children, let's look for African heroes if we are talking about a subject in history. And what is being generated on AI, for instance, in Kenya, we'll be looking at some freedom fighters. I actually know more than what AI is projecting. And I think when we don't now teach them the skill of traditional research, quote unquote, they are just taking what is coming up. And I think that is a big concern from where I sit. Then I'm also finding in the space where we want to learn a lot of things, people are just copy pasting. I mean, you just put a prompt and you don't even think of editing it to suit the need that you want, and people are just copy pasting a lot of prompts. That is a sign of laziness, and I think it is now being inculcated in our daily values and chores, such that even just responding to a normal text, responding to an email, people are just copy pasting what they put on the prompt, and it has acronyms. It's somebody else's tone, and to be honest, I think there's a bunch of laziness that we are adopting from overusing AI without wanting to go an extra mile to just do the general work itself. It's a good thing, but I think if we don't try and have a balance, then it becomes a big issue. Also, in the sense of university, there's a lot of plagiarism. We need to also teach children, from when they're younger, when they're doing research and all, how to give citations. But there's a lot of plagiarism that now we need to start being concerned about, because even in the university, people are just, again, copy, paste. And then when things are being marked, it is somebody else's work. They really don't care. If you ask somebody to regurgitate what they gave you in terms of an assignment, they really can't, because they didn't take thought, they didn't read through, they just copy-pasted for the sake of submitting the assignment, and that is it. And I think that's a growing concern. So we need to have really a balance towards it. Yeah. You are on mute. You're on mute, Angie.
Okay, sorry, I keep muting myself and forgetting. Something I want to ask all of you, just what you said now really fascinates me about the whole bias in AI. We know that bias in AI comes from the missing data, right? And these AI systems, the main ones, are made in the largest countries now. I mean, US, France, China, basically the ones that we're using. So I would imagine that has an influence on kids, right, that are not from that country, like in their worldview. Have you seen like any of that? I mean, we can maybe ask you, you're on, and then Edith and Rocio, I think you had some other things you wanted to present about bias as well. So yeah, have you experienced that? Because I would think that's a big problem in education as well.
I think that gender bias and racial bias is the most frequent bias that you find clearly. And you can use, for example, ChatGPT as example of that. If you don't mind, I can show you some examples that I have. Okay, so for example, I asked to ChatGPT to create an image for this idiom that is che dorme non piglia pesce in Italian. If you snooze, you lose. And the result has been this kid, Caucasian, male, in an aesthetics that obviously is Western aesthetics. The same and terrible is happening if you are for professions. You can see truck driver, nurse, and doctor. So, slim, Caucasian, and obviously perfect in this war of Occidental Western war. The same happens, for example, if you ask for suggestion for books. If you ask for 14-year-old boy books, Percy Jackson and the Hobbit, that is excellent, and for the girl, Malala and the Green Gables. So, I mean, we have absolutely a problem about bias. For that reason, I was thinking to this critical thinking routine, no? Is this information true and accurate? Ask to the teachers, the students, to use this kind of routines. How can I think more deeply about the answer? What is the IA assuming? How does it compare to what I already know? So we are calling there to prior knowledge. And as well, ethical decisions, routines. Who do I harm with this action? So that prepared the students to understand that they have to be responsible of their acts. So stop sharing. I just want to show this kind of solutions that we are creating in Rust, but with fundamentals, no? Because at the end, as critical thinking is open questions, is making the students responsible, because AI is the present and there will be the future of them. So we have to prepare them to create more equitative world of AI.
Thank you so much. And I really can't wait to hear your thoughts, Edith and Evelyn, on this, because I speak with confidence about this quite a bit, about this problem of bias with AI. Yeah. I don't ask AI for a image of an African because I know it's not going to look like the Africans that I know. So yeah, please let me know. How do you deal with that, like on the ground with kids and, in schools? Please, maybe Edith first.
Well, we do similar exercises like Rocio was showing us, where we actually ask them to do the prompt and then for them to see themselves without any influence from us. And then we ask them what they think about the output. And usually you'll find that, like, when you ask for a picture of an African child, you get a child who's probably dressed in African print fabric, was typically a village child. And some of the children that we work with will say, "What? I don't look like this." And really, in Africa has such a diversity of skin tones and even racial backgrounds. So for the AI to quickly assume that when you're talking about an African child, it's a child who's in the village with the typical kinky hair, certain dress codes, and certain backgrounds with the little hat behind them, or sometimes an animal or two. And what that has done, when you're asking about the worldview of the students, it has helped them to also accept that in every tool that we are using online, there is usually a human bias behind it, but also sometimes there are certain influences in terms of the narrative that is being pushed. Like, some of the students will say, this is all very Anglo-Saxon when we look at it. There's hardly any depiction of the global worldview. And so it makes for pretty interesting conversation. And I love how they are applying their minds to what they're using.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm happy to hear that, actually, that helps them understand better. How is it for you? What's your experience, Evelyn?
As Edith was speaking, I'm imagining how the first time I myself prompted AI to generate an image of an African professional, I had Afro hair. So see, I don't have Afro hair, but it has that bias towards how we look and everything. But one of the things I've actually done in a class setup, there was a challenge that we prompted AI to roast. So we said, roast yourself based on the prompts that you put on AI, so that it gives you an output on, it gives you a banter on how you prompt the search engines to roast you. And it was really, really interesting. I think that just that particular exercise helped the learners to also see how the other side of the internet can actually look. And as much as it is fun, because for them it was not really deep jokes, it's opened them up to a different perspective of how the engines can actually look like. And even just making them understand that if you don't want to chat, you can actually speak to the engine it gives you, and then your voice variations and the kind of prompts that you put. Yes, I know if we really coach them in a way that they can expand their critical thinking, it can really, really work for them. But in terms of bias, we really, really need to put in a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of research to just build in content that makes sense, that actually makes sense for everybody who is a consumer, but not bring out just certain perspectives about how people think about things. I do think we need to go back to the archives. We need to put in actual data. We need to really feed the machines with content that is verifiable. Why do I say this? Because I do believe the fact that we are talking about AI in technology, first, we can't run away from it. And it is a fact that we adults who are teaching children will have to adopt quickly into helping our learners learn the different ways of research. But we need to accept that this technology is already in class. So as much as that acceptance has to come, especially from us, then we need to feed it with the right information. So that if that is going to be their first basis of research, then let them get the right information so that when they're projecting their answers, when they're putting out their research, it is content that is verifiable. Because I actually really do think, just the way journalists nowadays, they are competing with misinformation from main media and social media. They're really fighting that because social media is very fast. So by the time you're verifying, the information has already spread. We need to come back and feed the learning models information that is really critical, is true, so that our children have a depository of the right information as they're doing their learning and their research.
Thank you. I mean, that's really interesting. As you were speaking, it made me really think of this digital well-being side of the whole thing, right? I mean, as I said before, I was interviewing some parents because my daughter's school doesn't have any devices except for an interactive chalkboard. We used to call them chalkboards. And so, but I know from parents who have devices and the insane stuff that the kids share if they're not locked down properly, which they're often not, the things that kids are sharing to each other and, like in class or with the school device. So I don't know, is something that you've also dealt with? I mean, is this also like a universal problem? And what can we do about that? Because obviously schools are overwhelmed with setting the devices properly and kids are too young to understand it. So how have you dealt with that? You can go ahead, Evelyn.
All right. I think Edith in the beginning of the session had mentioned that, of course, like in Africa, let me also talk about Kenya. There's such a disparity on how there is access to gadgets, right? In our country, the internet is actually in more spaces than gadgets. I actually often make a joke that in most homes, in most schools, we have more internet-enabled gadgets than we have toilets, which probably is a reality for everyone seated here, not just Africa. But within different setups of schools, we have private schools that probably have more gadgets than public schools. And so from the school level, it will be a school-based policy or a school initiative whereby if the school really wants students to have access to gadgets, they would ask students to bring their own devices. And at that point, we do advocate for them to have like bring your own device policy in school so that it aligns also with the kind of policies that the school has adopted, mostly because the school doesn't have enough gadgets for everybody. At a national level, even with government, we are really, really trying to ask our internet service providers to put softwares or probably like cut off those, what we call quote unquote, age inappropriate sites from the point of termination into certain spaces. For instance, if it is a school and we know that this internet is terminating into a school, why can't we just put the last mile? We put protection on the last mile so that at least those who know bad sites exist are being protected. Those who don't know are not stumbling upon them. So that making sure that also governments are playing their part, even especially in homes, because especially in my country, we do have specific internet bundles. Like I have internet for home, I have internet in malls, we have internet for schools. So if those packages for internet specifically can have protection at the last mile, that really helps, and that can only be done through government policy. But then coming back to school, I know like for teachers and the adults within the school, some of them probably don't have that cognizance or maybe the knowledge that even with my own phone, if I was to give it to a child, for instance, to just research something or go online and do something, they forget quickly that all the accounts that are in my phone as an adult are 18 plus, right? And if I was to give a child initially maybe to go on TikTok or to go on Instagram, their own accounts should be, private by default. And that is also something that we're really trying to educate the teachers and parents. If you're going to give a child your phone, can you log off from your accounts? If they have their own accounts, let them log in into their accounts, because then their accounts are curated and their settings are best for them. So accidentally, or maybe because of we don't know, or maybe because of laziness, we just hand them over our phones, our devices. Why? We want them to learn at that moment. But in essence, we also like exposing them to things that we probably did not intend for us to expose them. So there's a lot of going back to the drawing board, especially with EdTech. And I think in the previous session, also somebody said, depending on these different schools have so many apps they want children to log into. That becomes an issue if there's no access. It becomes an issue where there are shared devices. It also becomes an issue where maybe internet is not very available for all the children to have equality. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a really good point about, passing the device to the kids and having a separate government law. And I want to go to Rocio now because I actually learned this from a teacher in Italy. I think there actually is that law in Italy that if you give a child a device, the internet service provider has to provide the blocking automatically. And I would assume that all the devices in schools by definition have that. So I just want to know, like, Rocio, how was your experience with that?
Okay, yes, we obviously apply a firewall to stop the kids to use obviously some websites, etc. But we provide to the kids also the iPads, etc. Obviously with some rules. And as I didn't say, but in Italy you have to be, in order to use generative AI, you have to be 13 years old and have the parental consent to do it. So even to access, if they access to a platform AI from the school with the login of the email, they can't. I mean, that is something that we have to be really careful because, and only allow when we have made the risk assessment test and everything, then we can say, okay, if we have your parental consent and you have understood how to use it, okay, you can go on. But yes, it is a problem, obviously, that, and also the inequality exists also in Italy. We saw Europe and all the Western countries. We saw with the COVID how families were working online in the schools with only the man or the father phone. So the kids were sharing the same phone to access to the lesson. So inequality, unfortunately, is something that we have to take into consideration too, and we have to work for avoid that bridge.
Thank you. Now, it's always interesting from a school perspective. I feel like we don't get that very much. How about you, Edith? What's your experience?
Definitely what Rocio has just alluded to, the inequality. One of the things that we also saw was the bring your own phone to school, like in Kenya, as Evelyn was saying. However, you'd find that there's some children whose parents cannot afford to buy a separate phone for them. And that would also cause an imbalance where now the school is having to manage stolen phones or someone borrowing and not returning in time. And it's just created a lot of hullabaloo. We actually had the question to say, should smartphones be allowed in the schools in the first place? And my personal input into that was that as long as the school has other gadgets, for example, the ones that have desktop computers, the ones that have iPads, there is no need for the additional device. We all know how distracting it is to have one device. And when you now have more than one, you find the children are very distracted and their focus is no longer on anything else other than that phone that they have. And then in terms of the strategies, I had written in my notes something about the concern that I have around the hype that has been created about AI tools in general, and where you have these young people who are very, very, like, I can't even overemphasize the extent of their curiosity when it comes to new emerging technologies. And we've got the rest of the world making so much noise about AI and the race to be the leader in AI development. And yet we're leaving out the critical elements, the foundational elements where we teach them how to be good digital citizens, for example, how to have a good relationship with that technology. Now, because they can go onto these platforms and have actual relationships with with the AI, they don't want to do anything else. They've removed themselves. They found a way to escape the responsibilities, to escape their challenges, to escape whatever the circumstances of their situation. So it is now more than just the relationship between the broader application of AI in the school, but also that intimate relationship that children have when you give them these gadgets, when you give them access to those platforms. And what you were saying about the parental consent below 18, below 13, we never get any school that comes to parents and says, can you please consent to your child using these platforms? So there's a lot of work to do. We need a multi-stakeholder approach, parents, educators. We need to bridge that gap between them and the actual student. What's actually happening and what we think is happening worlds apart. So in Zimbabwe, we also have a law that says that where a child commits a crime, parents are liable. And that has woken up a lot of parents to make them more active in terms of monitoring what their children are doing online. Because you see that now you've got things like cyberbullying as well coming out of that.
Exactly. No, and actually, I just, unfortunately, we're out of time. I do want to close with following up a comment from one of our attendees, Daner. She was pointing out that in some schools in Italy, they decided not to use any tablets to ensure distraction. It doesn't hamper mental development and learning basic core skills. And she pointed out that Sweden is leading the global push on banning screens in classrooms. And there's a lot of discussion. I know Sue was talking before. That's one big thing for her. So I think this is one thing that globally we really could work together more on, is learning from EdTech and tech in classrooms experiences from the early adopters and like the late adopters, how we can really learn from each other. So thank you so much for this panel. Really interesting, really great people. Please contact them. Sorry for the difficulty connecting, but eventually we all got here. So I don't know if you guys are going to go to be around, that people can chat with you, or...
Yes, I will be around. Thank you so much for this wonderful conference that is bringing together different perspectives that are so needed. Thank you so much. Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's been great learning from each other as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And thank you for just dropping in my name. And I'm glad I was still seated on my desk.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was great to have you. Yeah.
Thank you.